Great, thank you, Yanni. And then you just heard about us, so easy, we can skip those. And then just as an intro, I know that if you're here, you're already self-selecting. I'm sure that you already know this deep in your heart, that we have so much power at our fingertips, but it's how do we get that to the people who need it, and how do we work together to combine our resources? Because there's never enough resources right now to meet the needs of everyone who needs it. So just wanted to say thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. We're excited. Um, the format that we're going to use today, I'm going to be kind of an interviewer because Tila really is, she has so much knowledge about these subjects. So we'll do like some Socratic method with Tila today. And this is our roadmap. We're going to start out with just some of a big overview of bird's eye overview of the many current crises that we're facing right now and the areas of particular pro bono need, the benefits of volunteering for the attorney specifically, because it does make you a better lawyer and a better human, I think, and how to find a particular opportunity that meets your skill set, your schedule, everything else. And I think, again, I think most of us on this call probably already are aware that we have many barriers to legal services and justice. And we are facing, societal inequities and massive funding cuts. Legal aid funding is always in jeopardy. Even the little that we have, it's still not, it's definitely not enough. High cost for law students, high cost of, the debt, lack of diversity. So this one, I love, this was one of Tila's slides, and just thinking for a minute about, when we first went into court, how scary that was. And imagine if you're not represented at all and how terrifying that must be, especially when there are such high stakes, like maybe your housing is at stake or your children's custody is at stake. So of course, and then the parade of horribles, all of the things that we're dealing with right now, from pandemic mush brain and constant anxiety about the health of those we love, unemployment, business closures, evictions especially. So I'm going to turn this over to Tila to give us a run through about how all of these crises that we're living through, how it translates to pro bono needs and what other pro bono legal services organizations are already doing that we can plug into.
Thank you, Maria. So this chart just gives you some sense of all the legal issues that have come up post-pandemic and post-wildfires throughout California. This is, of course, not a complete list, but one of our biggest challenges is that folks don't always know their problems are legal, and people don't always realize what legal problems might be associated with these issues. I've had a lot of people ask me, but okay, so there's wildfires, but what can you do about that legally? But really, all of these issues are raised as well as many other concerns. And I think if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the biggest areas that we expect that we are seeing right now. You might have heard of the eviction cliff or the eviction tsunami that we expect to come when all of the various moratoriums are lifted or end. In some parts of California, we're already, and in the country, in fact, we're already seeing a lot of evictions coming through. And we expect in the bigger cities, which have moratoriums, that we will begin to see just tons of evictions. And by the way, we also expect to begin to see lots of foreclosures for the landlords and just homeowners who don't have the money to pay their mortgages. Family law is always an area of the greatest need. And let me quickly say about family law, if you can imagine, there is no more core issue for people's personal lives than family law. Do I get to see my children? Am I going to be safe when I go home? Those kinds of issues are really go to the core of who a person is. And in California, an average of 80% of the litigants who go to family court go by themselves without a lawyer, and it is hard. Um, we also see consumer issues in immigration. I'm also often asked, but okay, but I really want to work in racial justice. How can I do that? And here's the thing, you can, absolutely, because racial justice is very much reflected in all of these issues. And just as one example, right, the distribution of housing wealth and general wealth is absolutely informed 100% by racial issues and by racial bias. There's a terrific article by Ta-Nehisi Coates in The Atlantic from a few years ago called The Case for Reparations, and it's about reparations, but it also really does a great job of explaining the connection between racial justice and housing justice. So I commend that to you. Sometimes we wonder, well, what can I do in racial justice besides observe at a demonstration? This is actually really the core work you can do.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, yeah, because the National Lawyers Guild does the legal observing, and that's great, but this is really legal services that are really, really needed right now. Next slide.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a big one. Now, this one is, Yanni mentioned that, I work with the Los Angeles Incubator Consortium, and Tila was responsible for founding the Bay Area Legal Incubator Consortium. And that is helping solo lawyers launch practices to serve the community. So like a hybrid public interest private firm. And one of the big parts of our curriculum is doing pro bono work. And that's because it really does make you a better lawyer. So we're going to go over some of the benefits. And Tila, why don't you explain, I'm sure that you've seen this working with volunteer services, how it really helps a person grow.
Yes, when we ask people, why do you do pro bono? The first thing they always say is because it's the right thing to do, or I like giving back. And that is key. And we will talk about being a happy lawyer and feeling good about your work in a moment. But there are other really great benefits that it's important not to lose track of. And this is a list of 5 of them. The competence issue, pro bono work is a way for you to, first of all, you can gain competence in a particular area. If you think you might want to expand your practice into bankruptcy, what a great way to do it. Let's do some bankruptcy pro bono. Get the free MCLE, get the oversight and all of the things that come with pro bono that we'll talk about in a moment, and you've added a skill. But even if it's not like that, even if you are in a large firm and your specialty is mergers and acquisitions and that's what you want to stick with, it gives you much greater, some of the greater legal skills that are not associated with particular substantive law. How to negotiate confidently, how to appear in a courtroom, and how to present yourself, how to work with a client and try to understand what the client's goals are, even though they may differ from the ones you think the client should have. I spent 10 years in private practice, and I had that feeling a lot with my non-pro bono clients. So gives you a lot of skills. Often it gives you a chance to manage a relationship or a case or a matter, which is something that as a more junior lawyer you may not be given the opportunity to do. It also gives you confidence for all the reasons I've said before, but it is really hard, particularly as you're starting out as a lawyer, to have that sense of confidence. And unfortunately, there are quite a few lawyers of my generation who like nothing more than to try to put you in your place. Being able to do other kinds of work and feel yourself as a contributing member of society really contributes to your ability to sit there and be your own confident lawyer that you are. We've talked about legal skills in specific. And that's a great thing that we'll talk about, is trying to identify what skills you'd like. If you are a litigator but you have never gone to trial, you might try to prioritize chances to get into court. And don't just look for trial work, though, maybe look for evidentiary hearings, right? Because there's sort of the equivalent of a trial in many ways. Or perhaps you have never had the chance to talk to clients before, and that's a thing you'd really like to feel more confident and better at. So, really, a great way to sort of go through and think to yourself, what are the skills I want to develop? And I've mentioned subject matter expertise again. And, let's not lose sight of your reputation, right? Your reputation in the community is frankly what is going to last well beyond any particular case you've handled or any particular job you've held. And the way to build that case is to build up your profile. So some of the ways to do that are things like joining bar associations, writing articles for local legal papers. But a really great way to do it is to do pro bono work, because then you are seeing your colleagues are seeing you give back, and the bench is also seeing you give back. So it is a terrific way to build up your reputation, and that is your most important currency throughout your whole career.
That is so true. I concur.
Thank you.
So here's some other slides. I think you've gone through some of these, but we'll just go through the slides to see if there's anything else you want to touch on.
I think it's important to mention that almost every time you do pro bono, and it is really important to do pro bono through a legal services provider. I somehow cannot recall if we have a slide on this, but let me just say now that some people do the kind of pro bono where their friend Esmeralda's cousin's nephew's husband needs something or another. And sometimes we are stuck with that work because of Esmeralda and our relationship with her. But generally, I would really encourage you to go through a pro bono provider. There are big and small, and we'll talk at the end about how to find them in your area. But they're going to provide you with training. They're going to provide you with supervision, which is really a key part of how you're going to learn. They're going to provide you with malpractice insurance that covers before anything you have does. They're going to offer you access materials and a chance at having a mentor or mentors. So those are really key things that will really support you in your pro bono work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I meant to put a slide in about that, about boundaries, because that's when you you try to take on everything on your own, it's too much for one person. Even one person's total case can be too much for you. And so that's the benefit of working with an organization, is that they've already established the contact, they've established all of this other supportive services, so you can keep your boundaries. Especially if you're in solo practice, you need to work on making money, not pro bono work. Once you open the floodgates to anyone, it can take over your life. So when you do this, it really helps your boundaries. So it helps you with self-care, because otherwise you're drowning. You have to take care of yourself and keep those boundaries solid.
I think we've talked about this, but I think that, you really do get that sort of team spirit feeling when you collaborate with a team. We're going to talk about limited scope opportunities, but when you have a chance to volunteer together with other people, it really does give you a sense of community. I run a drop-in clinic, and our lawyers hang out together, know each other, ask after each other's families and practices, and it's really a great additional benefit.
Yeah, and I do think those bonds are lifelong. I've seen that through the Lawyers Guild and through other organizations where they have literally been volunteering together since the Vietnam War, and then they still know each other. It's a very small world. And I think the volunteer bonds that we share, they're invisible bonds, but they are probably even stronger than the ones of people who we actually are paid to work with, because these are people we want to work with. So it's very strong bonds of friendship. I'll just add that. Okay, same thing. Yeah.
Yes, I think we've covered this. It's really a great opportunity to build, to show leadership and get frontline work with your building your credibility. I think that's well put.
Yeah, and get entree. I remember one story from the Lawyers Guild that the LAPD, the chief of police, would take a call from this particular person, because that he wouldn't take a call from, say, just a plaintiff's lawyer who he knew was in it for the money.
Right.
But he would take a call from somebody who he knew was already representing people not for the money.
Right.
So it gives you entree. It really does give credibility. Okay, this one, Tila, it's all you.
Well, I think that you find, regardless of whether you are not so happy in your legal practice or thrilled, even if you go home every night and say, "What a great job I have," this is really something that makes you feel better. And you'll hear this everywhere, that if you want to feel happy, feel grateful. And you make such a concrete difference for people's lives. And I have found that our pro bono clients are so grateful. And you can see that you've made a difference. And sometimes your difference is that you spent 20 minutes with this person, but you explained what was happening, or you helped them fill out this form that they've been completely stuck with. It just really makes you feel that it's sort of more grounded in yourself. And I think if there was ever a year that we needed to feel grounded and happy with ourselves, it was 2020. So hoping that will change soon. But in the meantime.
Yeah, what else? We've talked about that. Yeah, challenge and learn, because those of us who love novelty and learning, great. Great chance to learn and get your feet wet. Okay, so now we're to the meat and potatoes of the presentation, how to find an opportunity that matches your interests, goals, skill set, and your schedule. So there are a lot of things to say about this one. So I will ask Tila, interview style. So what kind of considerations do you advise people to think about when they come to you? If I said, "Hey, Tila, I'm looking for, I want something to do. I feel just so devastated by all the disasters and I want to help. Where do I go?"
So I think these are some great suggestions here on this slide. Ask yourself, first of all, what do you like doing, right? If you are a person who is a transactional lawyer and you have been a transactional lawyer for 15 years, you could be the person who's saying, "I wonder what the other side is like. What do they do when they go to court?" Or you might be the person who says, "Look, I want to help out, but really, truly, I would rather die than set foot in a courtroom or deal with a piece of litigation." So it's important to know that about yourself. That's just one example, right? You might have, as we discussed before, particular skills or that you want to develop, areas of law that you want to learn, or the chance to take a deposition, or the chance to argue a motion, or the chance to draft a settlement agreement, or review a lease, whatever these areas are, think about that. That's actually a really great exercise just in general, to try to think to yourself, what are the skills I would like to build? It's really important to say that if you speak a language that is more prevalent in your area, and that will depend, right? Parts of, in Glendale, the question is, do you speak Armenian, right? In downtown LA, you would ask, what about Korean? In Northern California, we have particular need for Cantonese speakers and for Spanish speakers. So Spanish is kind of a universal for our whole state, but if you have any of those languages, or another one that fits into a community that I haven't named, you could be really of enormous assistance, and you might want to start with that. You want to ask how much time you have. Some of you may have maybe working at a larger firm or an office that has a policy that says you can get credit for up to X number of hours. Some of you do not have that constraint. You might be having to do your pro bono work outside of your work hours. So what does that mean about when you're available? And of course, if you have any special needs that need to be accommodated, I would normally say, are you able to get to places? That's kind of a little bit more moot right now, but you might have tech challenges, right? So whatever those concerns are. Um, and I would think about what areas are of interest to you, but I would encourage you to think about it with an open mind, because I think some of the areas that we know are less, there are areas that people have a knee-jerk reaction against, but really are very meaningful. I've told you already about family law, which, in addition to other things, is family law issues are the primary way that women and children become homeless. But you might be interested in homelessness. That might be something that particularly speaks to you. You might be stricken by the situation of dreamers or children and parents being separated at the border, and that part really speaks to you. It depends on what's of interest. There are also some areas of law that are really excellent parallels to something you do already. So I always feel eviction defense is a perfect example, because first of all, eviction defense, the lawsuit process itself, is exactly like business litigation, but everything is shorter and smaller. So you take depositions, but they take an hour and a half or two. You have a settlement conference, but it's kind of free and loose. You can make a motion, but it will have 2 pages to it. You can go to trial. It probably won't take more than 2 days at the absolute max. So it's a great chance to practice those skills without, having to wait for 2 years for a business litigation case to unfold. So if you're interested in developing those skills. On the other hand, if what you want to learn is negotiation, which is a huge skill that, of course, both transactional and litigator folks use. Again, eviction defense, often there is a settlement conference possibility. There's also a lot of work in consumer around consumer debt and trying to work out the consumer debt. That happens in bankruptcy as well. Lord knows insurance law, that happens. So in short, there's a lot of, and another example, one more example is that if you are just beginning the process of learning how to set forth an argument, FEMA appeals are an excellent place for you to start, because they are, again, quite contained. These are people who applied for FEMA benefits and were denied. And very commonly they're denied because they didn't attach all the right paperwork, or they failed to argue this one piece that the statute says they have to argue. So that's where lawyers tend to get involved. We often are not involved in the first application, so we get involved in the appeal. And it's, compiling all the documents and attaching them and cross-referencing them. It's an excellent exercise and not terribly time-consuming. It also does often involve helping someone negotiate with a government bureaucracy. And one of my most meaningful pro bono activities ever was really not even law, but the client had a green card. She had just had a baby. The baby was 6 weeks old, and she found out that her mother in Peru was dying. So she wanted to go and bring the baby to see her mother and say goodbye. But you can't leave the country unless you have a passport for everyone who's traveling, even if they're 6 weeks old. To get a passport, you have to get a birth certificate. To get a birth certificate, you have to wait for the wheels of the county's Department of Health to churn until it spits out the birth certificate. So really all it took, I said to the client, just tell them, look, I have an emergency. And her eyes got really big, and it was clear to me that the way that I view bureaucracy, which is, I'm sorry, ma'am, let me speak to your manager, is not where people come from, right? If their experience is not that. And she might not have gotten that result. So I met her at the Department of Public Health with my suit and my briefcase, and I said, excuse me, ma'am, I'd like to speak to the manager. And we had a birth certificate, Wasn't really even legal work, but it was really meaningful and made a big difference in her life.
Oh, that is a great example. I love that. And that's what I would love to tell people too. Like, don't feel like just because you haven't already done a jury trial that you can't do something else, because a lot of it ends up being the education gap or the language gap. And I'll briefly share one that this was somebody came to a clinic. She says in Spanish, she's monolingual Spanish, and said, well, I got this court order that I have to move out. How much time do I have? I don't understand what it says. And then I looked at it and it said, trial, this matter was called for trial. Plaintiff failed to appear, judgment for defendant. And I was like, no, you won. You don't need to move out. Like,
Yeah.
she was already had her everything. But how could she understand that? She can't even read English, let alone plaintiff failed to appear, judgment for defendant. What does that even mean?
Right.
That's how little it can be. And it's like, just thank goodness that she came to that clinic.
Yes.
And, so just things like that. Sometimes it can be that simple. So it's
Perfect example. Yeah.
it's not that honest.
So,
but,
yeah,
but anyway,
right.
but yeah. Oh yeah. And another pitch I wanted to do, just to add on to what you said, was the unemployment appeals as well. They're similar, I think, to those insurance ones. The unemployment appeals are a very narrow matter, and you don't technically need a lawyer to come with you, but you can help somebody out on that. And then the other thing is, evictions do have the right to a jury. So you can actually do a jury trial in an eviction like that. It happens really fast.
Exactly right.
Okay, Tila, go for it.
So an important thing to know is that there are ways to spend a lot of time. The most obvious way that we've all heard of is the dark green one here, full scope. You contact your local legal aid, you say, I'd like to take an eviction defense case. They introduce you to Jane. Jane has just been served. You file the answer, you do the motion practice, the settlement efforts, the discovery, you go to trial. By the way, it's only been 4 weeks for that whole process, and then you're done. We sometimes call that the till death do us part client, although, as I say, in eviction, it goes quite quickly. But you can also do it on a limited basis where there is, you are just doing a piece of it. So you could be doing, a very common way to do this is a clinic. I'm going to come in and to this clinic, and I'm going to staff it from 1 to 4, and I'm going to meet with 2 clients in that time and help them with XYZ, whatever subject it is. And then when I leave, that's the end of it. I'm their lawyer, but only for that hour that we spend together. Or it could be a subject limited scope. This is a little less common, but you could take a family law case and say you're only going to help with the custody issues. You're not going to get involved with the property issues, or vice versa. We always need help with intake and triage, so that first contact with the client, where the client is telling their whole story, and it goes from, in 1973, my mother-in-law, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes the client comes in and says, I'm being evicted, I really need help, here's my papers. And sometimes they start with the mother-in-law in 1973, and you need to ask questions and listen actively so you can try to figure out where we are right now and where this client needs help, and then working with your legal aid provider to figure out, does this fit in the cases we're taking or the priority cases, or how do we categorize it? And then finally, there is always legal research, particularly for law students. This is an excellent way to begin to get involved. And to support those who are doing pro bono. Mm-hmm. I want to say a little more about limited scope. I think we do that on our next slide, right? So this is a quick ethics lesson. We wish we could give you 5 minutes of ethics credit for this, but so limited scope is perfectly acceptable, and it's not till death do us part. It's the little piece of the case. What is really important about it, though, is that the scope has to be reasonable. So you can't say, I'm going to help you up until 10 minutes before trial and then hasta la bye-bye. That's not reasonable for the client, right? It also has to be in writing. And the most important thing to understand about that is that if you step out of the box, if you draw a little box around your representation and you say today only, and then tomorrow you call the client to check in on how they're doing and give them some additional advice, there is no longer a box at all, right? You have effectively said you're going to be the client's lawyer. So really important to take that seriously. This is especially hard in the era of COVID when we're limited to phone calls and Zoom and can't always connect. But you can do a new retainer agreement. You could do a new little agreement that says, I will represent you today. I know I helped you yesterday. I'm going to help you today, but not tomorrow and not for the rest of time. But you do have to be clear. The other thing that is really great about limited scope opportunities is that there is a rule of professional conduct, 6.5, which says that you do not, in a limited scope pro bono context, you do not need to do a conflicts check for the client as long as it's not apparent to you that it's a conflict. So if I sign up to work in Maria's clinic and they hand me an intake form for a client I'm supposed to talk to, and I see that the opposing party is Joe Schmo, and I remember all too vividly representing Joe 2 years ago, or I know that my law partner did, then I have to say, I'm sorry, Maria, can you give me another client? But if I look at Joe Schmo and I think, well, I don't know, then that's fine. That's okay. There is no conflict problem there.
All right, and I did not know that, so that's really interesting. That's good. All right, so you want to keep taking this one away?
Sure.
This is
So
a lot of
there's a variety of things that you might be doing when you're doing these limited discrete tasks. You might be actively listening, and to tell you the truth, we have some clients who come and they go through intake and they get up to leave. And we're like, no, this was just the first step. And they stay, but they were so happy that someone listened to their story and the frustrations that they were facing. So just really paying attention and listening and occasionally saying, so it sounds like you're really upset about what your mother-in-law did with the house or whatever it is. It's really great. We can also do so much help just explaining what is going on. And Maria, your story was a perfect example. Our courts don't tend to issue orders in English. They issue the orders in law speak, and just explaining what's going to happen or explaining the concept of you filed a motion, so now the other side gets to file a response, and then there's going to be a hearing, and the judge is going to decide at the hearing and issue an order, and that's what will happen. Just explaining that, as well as explaining options. You really want to see your kid and you haven't seen that kid in a long time. Here are some choices. So you could try to just get visitation for starters, or you could ask for full custody. Here's a way to negotiate. If you do this, here's what might happen next. That's really critical. And, if you think back to any problems you've ever had, you can probably think about the ways that you were a little bit lost in the sauce and kind of upset that this one said that to you, and it really doesn't matter, but it's what you're stuck on. In eviction, we often hear, but the landlord told me it was all fine, and that actually could be legally relevant, so it's probably not a good example, but, the landlord and I were getting along so well, and I liked him so much, but so totally understandable why you would feel betrayed by them, but that's not, helping them focus on what the legal issue is. And obviously referring for next steps, helping out with forms or technology, which at this moment is really challenging. Many courts are having hearings only remotely, and our clients don't always have the ability to navigate that. Most poverty law is done with forms, which is better than having to draft pleadings from scratch, but still really challenging. And as we mentioned, the interpreting piece is also really key.
Yeah, and translating documents too, I know. Like a
Right.
lot of times that our incubator attorneys, we have a lot of different languages spoken. And then sometimes an organization will need something drafted in a really particular language, but it's a really long document. So we definitely give pro bono credit for that.
Yeah, and even if it's not a long document, I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
we try to get flyers out, for example, for disaster relief. We have this hotline and this online um, platform, and we're trying to get the word out, but we need to get the word out in probably 25 languages. So it's, you know,
Yeah.
challenging. So.
And Google Translate works pretty well, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I use Google Translate to try to set up a play date with my daughter's best friend in kindergarten, and apparently what I said was, "Forsooth, verily, for a date of playing would I like with you and your, progeny." Yeah, so in a pinch it's okay, but it's not great.
Exactly. It's not quite the same. We are not there yet.
No.
And I do like that story too. Okay,
Uh,
so full scope.
And then in full scope, obviously, there you are, you're taking the client through litigation. You're helping them in their eviction defense, or you're helping them with the credit card they never had is suing them for collection, and you're representing them. You could be working to do the negotiations. Almost every legal matter has a negotiation component, whether you're negotiating with the government or the opposing party or the opposing party's lawyer. There's really quite a lot of contracts and transactional work, particularly. There are a number of organizations throughout the state that do work with small businesses, particularly those whose owners are low or moderate income, uh, who are people of color. There's a lot of work to be done there. Lease negotiations, lease drafting, contract drafting. There's even a little bit of IP work, though I will say that if you are an IP lawyer, I encourage you to think a little more broadly than that. But there is IP work. And of course, again, assisting with forms and translating and interpreting still remain key.
Yeah, and the incorporating. Yeah, I know that was a big one too, like
Yeah,
incorporating nonprofits and incorporating small businesses,
yeah,
things like that.
exactly.
There's something for everyone. Good.
There is. And people often ask, so what can I do if I basically, can't go anywhere or I'm not near anything? And the answer is all these things on the slide, um, and no doubt more. Many people are doing most of their clinics now remotely. Sometimes that's on Zoom, sometimes that's just with phones because clients can't always get Zoom going. Um, but we're doing all these same things, and as I said, many courts are holding remote hearings, and there are some terrific opportunities in all of these areas. It's basically we haven't really stopped doing anything. I would say the hardest work to do, not remotely, is working with people who are homeless. Um, but even that, there are definitely some opportunities.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's sort of a wild west right now too. If you have like some tech skills that you can assist a nonprofit with, or a legal services organization with, they could really, I'm sure, use that expertise as well, and ideas, just ideas outside the box, because we're all just kind of going through this as we go. So
Right.
good, we're moving right along.
We really are. So, here you see some ideas about where to reach out to see if you could volunteer. Um, the first bullet point, training, that's where you will get a lot of your trainings, and that's kind of a backwards way of finding your pro bono opportunities, but it is a good one. For example, if you go to pli.edu, you will find the disaster training that we have. We require you to watch 7 hours of this MCLE.
Okay.
Is that
Here.
on a different slide? Sorry. Yes, there you
Okay.
go. Um, Before you can staff either our hotline, which serves the whole state, or our online free legal answers platform where low-income people can ask questions related to COVID or related to the wildfires. Um, this is a training that is required. PLI has it, but it's free. You just have to create an account with PLI. Um, the other training place listed is PBTI. There you go, Pro Bono Training Institute, which is a terrific nonprofit run organization that offers you a whole bunch of different trainings, particularly if you're interested in housing. And there are a lot of resources. PLI, as you may know, tends to do CLEs in 1 hour chunks. PBTI's theory is to do much shorter chunks, so you could do, I don't remember, but my guess is that the negotiation and settlement agreements part 1 basics is 15 minutes long, and then how to prepare an answer is 18 minutes long. So they're bite size. You still, with all of these, get free MCLE credit. And often in these sites, it will redirect you to where you could go to put this work to work. Probono.net and lawhelpca.org and One Justice all have listings of organizations and ones that provide pro bono opportunities. Pro Bono Net is a national organization, and so you'll see here a variety of their national scope initiatives. And then you'll also see, for example, there's a California housing one, and you can click on a particular area. There you go. Wow, Maria, you are on top of it. With these regional justice networks, and if you were to click on one of these, you would, in most of them, you would see a link to agencies that are interested in pushing out pro bono assistance. Frankly, also Law Help is designed for the consumer, but it is also a good way for you. You can choose your location and a legal topic you're interested in, and then see the list of the agencies in that area that are doing that work. So those are some great ways. I can't remember what they One Justice here. Thank you. So these are actually programs that One Justice themselves runs. They used to do this thing called the Justice Bus. I guess COVID has put an end to that. But for example, they are great at coordinating immigration volunteers. So that's a great place to go if you're interested in doing that work. The other thing I would suggest, and it was on your other slide, Maria, is to consult your local bar association. Most of them, certainly in the bigger cities, but even in more rural areas, most of them will have some ability to refer to you. There is a legal aid group in every county. Now, it may be like the Legal Services of Northern California covers huge swaths of Northern California. So Yolo County and Yuba County and Siskiyou County and all of those. So they may or may not have an office in that county, but they will, they have centralized offices and centralized pro bono opportunities. And I have to say almost every one of them is doing disaster work right now because of the nature of the disaster. So Legal Services of Northern California has been very active in the fires in Butte County and the Yuba and those associated counties. LA County currently has a declaration. Your most obvious, the first stop for that work would be Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles. I am always happy to try to send you somewhere. So if there's something particular and you haven't been able to find it, just send me an email. Our contact information is in here. And I'm happy to try to point you in the right direction. As I get older, I feel like the main thing I have to offer anybody is, oh, I know a guy who... there are also, I should mention, pro bono organizations that do lots of things, and then there are pro bono organizations that just do specific things. So like in my area of the Bay Area, the AIDS Legal Referral Panel specializes in helping people who are HIV positive in a whole variety of areas. The Swords to Plowshares helps veterans primarily with veterans benefits. So if you want to drill down, you can, and if you want to go general, you can. When I
Right, or
was,
like Harriet Buhai.
yes, Harriet Buhai does family law, and right. So when I was 10 years in private practice, I did family law, eviction defense, consumer, veterans, benefits, immigration, asylum work, and I wrote an impact litigation. Uh, what do you call that?
And
Friend of
amicus?
amicus brief. Thank you, amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court. So uh, I tried everything. I found what spoke to me more and what was more terrifying to me, and those things will be different for each of you. Um, I
It may be a
encourage
once in a lifetime. Yeah.
I encourage you to really sample around. There's no rule that says you have to pick one area and do it forever.
Yeah. I just remembered one. You just jogged my memory of I represented a conscientious objector from the Iraq War, right? When we went in. And that was like I was a brand new lawyer and I somehow had this opportunity and I flew to New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina to do this conscientious objector hearing. Like, who does that? I would never have the chance to do that again. But
Right, right.
it's these really, well, we do have a couple of questions actually,
I
but
see
yeah.
that. While you're reading that question, I'll say about this. The ABA has a national site of volunteer opportunities. I have not spent a lot of time on it, but it's also a great way to start. I think, let your mouse do the walking is a good way to sort of explore. I
Yeah,
should mention too that if you have friends, another way, a good way to do it is to ask your friends, are you doing pro bono? What do you recommend? And they may be able to tell you, oh, I work with so and so at Legal
that's so
Aid.
true.
They were great to work with.
We
So
go to the questions part. Yeah, that is really true. If you see a happy lawyer walking around, ask them. So this question is really a good one because as lawyers too, we do have a lot of capacity to start up programs. If you see a need and nobody is doing it, you do have the ability often to kind of funnel all the resources together or connect existing, other things. Tila, what would you say did you read, or I guess I'll read it out loud because in case people aren't able to see, is there a resource on how to start a court pro bono clinic? I'm trying to get something going in state bar matters to help provide services to attorneys who meet low income parameters.
what a fascinating question. Jean, thank you very much for asking it. And I would be happy to talk to you about this afterwards. My quick answer is I have done this kind of thing, not in the state bar court, and I think that you have to start on kind of two sides at the same time, or at least that was my experience. What I would do in this situation, I think, is I would try to reach out to the defense attorneys bar, and hopefully, because you're thinking of this, you might know those folks, and try to get a few key people who are interested and who might be willing to do trainings or take cases themselves, and I would get a rough idea of what you thought you might do. I'm guessing in this case the easiest thing would be if the state bar court were to send out a notice along with we're having proceeding against you that says if you're low income you may qualify for this program. That would be the perfect situation, right? And then you could do a full scope just for that hearing piece. And then, of course, you have to approach the state bar. And so, with any luck, the defense lawyers know who might be the most sympathetic to start with. I would try to get one of those judges on board before. I wouldn't start with the state bar administration. I would try to get judges on board so that you have, and then ideally even prosecutors, they're not called that, but whatever they're called, so that you had oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Yeah, the more people you can get so that when you are going to hit somebody who's going to go to no first, you have kind of all the supporters summoned, while still communicating that you are just open to ideas and working to collaboratively problem solve.
Yeah, and I would think the county bar associations might be interested in that too, because if county bars are, really a resource for attorneys, there might be somebody. I mentioned Erin Joyce. She's very active with LA County Bar Association, and she was a former prosecutor who now is an attorney defense lawyer, and she's very into making the profession better and education for lawyers. And I think you can look her up on CalBar. I don't have her contact offhand, but I just look her up on CalBar. I would just reach out to her. She's involved in so many things and really is an amazing person to talk to.
Yeah, and there are some really cool prosecutors, whatever they're called. And again, I'm happy to introduce you to one or two. I have no idea where they'll stand on this issue, but I mean, phrased the way you phrased it, I don't know how you would argue with it, but.
Yeah, so Tila, I do have, since we do have a tiny bit of time left, I had another, it just hit me that there was one thing that we did not mention, which is elder law right now, and the different scams and the different vulnerabilities. Have you heard about opportunities and sort of where people would go if they do want to help people with, and actually, yeah, with the wills and trusts, but also from protection from scams?
Yeah. Yeah, that really falls more into the consumer issue, but seniors are especially vulnerable to that. Unfortunately, I mean, first of all, who scams a frail elderly person? But besides that, post-disaster is also a really common scam period where people go around and say, if you give me $2,000 now, I'll put you first in the fixing your roof department. And then, of course, they are never heard from again. There's a couple of ways to do work in those areas, but I would say the best way is there are legal services providers who focus on seniors. In San Francisco, there's legal assistance for the elderly, and I know in the East Bay, there's legal assistance for seniors, and Contra Costa has a group similarly, and I'm sure LA has multiple.
Oh, you know what? Orange County, yeah, Elder Law Center in
Yes.
Orange County, yeah.
So those folks will have a lot of opportunities, many of them scam related, a lot of them housing, because housing just shows up everywhere. And, often with the elderly, you get the problem of this apartment was okay for me before, but now I can't walk upstairs anymore and I need to be moved to an apartment that is accessible for my wheelchair or my walker, but they don't, the landlord refuses to cooperate. There's also elder abuse, so helping folks who either a tenant or a family member is taking advantage of them, often financially, sometimes physically abusive as well. And those are just like, actually, another thing we didn't talk about, domestic violence, which, is part of family law, but it is a separate practice area in many ways. And domestic violence is a practice area that is pretty contained. You make a motion, and there are maybe one or two hearings, and then that's it for 3 years. So it can be really rewarding, and it's more about arguing the facts. It's not as much a matter of the law. It's helping the person compile their story and pick the things that are relevant and not insert the things that are not relevant.
Yeah,
Elder abuse is the same thing. You can get a restraining order against a family member.
yeah. Yeah, and those are fun for newer attorneys. I mean, despite the usually tragic facts, but as far as just the legal work, it's an evidentiary standard that's kind of in between a regular civil and criminal. So it's kind of like a 3/4 evidentiary standard. So you do have to show evidence, but it is kind of designed for people without attorneys. So when you do have an attorney in there, it really is a good way to get your feet wet. And yeah.
No, that's exactly right. And I think all of these are examples of how you might find something that really does speak to you. if you have an elderly parent or grandparent and this really touches your heart, that might be your issue. But it might not be. It might be that your best friend was in an abusive relationship and that's what speaks to you. So sometimes it's your experience and it helps you connect.